Okay, let's do it. All right, hey, thanks everyone for coming. Thanks everyone for stopping talking and listening to me. Oh, wait, at the back. Eric. Can you guys hear me? Okay. Hey, thanks everyone for coming again. I'm going to do my normal ProductTank spiel and ask how many of you are here for the first time for a ProductTank.
Probably me.
Less and less, which is I'm not sure if that's good or bad, but it's great to have you people here who haven't come before. The basic idea behind what we're trying to do in ProductTank is to gather a whole lot of people together who are either practicing product leadership in any type of role already, or they're curious about it, or they work with product leaders, or they're running businesses that need product leaders, and we talk shop. So we might have people like James, who I'll introduce in a minute, who is going to talk about Hnry's journey in product. It may be a product manager themselves, it may be a designer talking about how it's really hard to work with product people. It could be all sorts of people who talk and share their experience and ideas. And so if anybody has a burning topic they want to talk about, then come and talk to me, and I can guarantee you some airtime up here in front of people. I'm going to do a bit of a shout out. If you can get me to the first slide. We've got a bit of a shout out for Optimizely, who are sponsoring this fancy kit over here, the live streaming gear, the mic, the lapel mic, and a few other bits and pieces. So they've been very supportive of ProductTank. They're doing that across a number of ProductTanks across the world, and we're one of the first ProductTanks to get the benefit of that sponsorship. So a huge shout out to them. And just click next. Oh, you got it there.
I did that.
There's like apparently there's a whole lot of free tools you can get for Optimizely. So if you're doing A/B testing and want to use some of their tools to help you understand customer behavior and do some experimentation, then Optimizely is the place to go and do check it out. And I'll share these slides somewhere, either on Slack. So who didn't know we had a Slack group? Okay, so we have a Slack group. Go onto the meetup. The meetup.com ProductTank page, and then in there there's a link to sign up to Slack, and it's a great place to ask questions, find out what people are doing, seeing what jobs are being thrown out there, and generally just have a chat with people who are in this room and beyond. So do that. And so I'm now going to hand over to Kelsey, who's going to talk a little bit about Optimal Workshop. And Kelsey's been at the company a short time as the head of product. And so I would like to say a few things.
Mostly really good housekeeping, but that's all good. Welcome to our brand new office. We just moved in here a couple months ago. I just started here a couple weeks ago, so I'm pretty new to this. But this is our very first meetup in this space, so this is all a prototype. If you have some suggestions on better ways to do this or things to optimize in here, that would be good. Come see me. But yes, I'm Kelsey. I'm the new product leader here at Optimal Workshop, and I'm pretty pumped to be here. Optimal is, if you're not familiar with our product suite, we're a product suite that helps you make sense of your users' experiences in order to make better ones. And we've got a whole bunch of cool tools. Which who here is from Optimal Workshop? Hands up, please. Ask any of these lovely humans for they can explain all the good things that we do. We're also hiring. We've got 3 ads in the back in case you want to take a peruse, or if you know some good people that we can work with. I'm also new to ProductTank. This is my first meetup, and I'm really excited to learn and hear from you, James, as well today. And I'm also brand new to New Zealand. I'm only a couple weeks into my time here, so I need some new friends. So please come talk to me afterwards, because I don't know too many people here. And then just in terms of what I'm learning about here in New Zealand, from a housekeeper's perspective, this is what you need to know if there's an earthquake. Drop, cover, and hold, and do not leave the building until you are advised to do so. If there's a fire, follow the signs. This used to be a cinema, so they know how to get out from a fire, which is good. Head out the doors onto Courtney Place, and then walk up the road that way, and you'll be out of the tsunami zone, is what I'm told. Also, there are bathrooms around the corner here, just near the bar. There are drinks over here. There's pizza at the back. Please enjoy and welcome to our space.
So that's it. So we're going to kick off. James, thank you. I had no idea what he was going to present because he didn't reply to my email saying let's do coffee and talk about what you're going to present.
I never got that email.
But I have full faith. Reassured that he's an amazing speaker, and it's going to amaze you with all the amazing things that Hnry can do. So with that set up, I will hand it over.
Awesome. Thanks, Tokes. I don't remember getting that email, but fair enough. Hopefully everyone can hear me at the back. I tend to be quite noisy with or without a microphone, so hopefully just wave if you can't hear. So yeah, first of all, this is actually my first ProductTank, so thank you for having me in. Thank you to Optimal Workshop for the awesome space and the spread and everything else. So I have put together a few basic slides. I kind of want to talk a little bit about Hnry's journey and where we started, a little bit about how our product developed and how we build product today. You're not going to be too impressed by the slides. It's mostly emojis. So, and I got a bit stuck at one point. You'll be able to see I couldn't put any more emojis in it. But anyway, without further ado, we'll kind of kick off. So I wanted to start off by talking about building from personal pain, because genuinely that's where Hnry started, probably about 4 years ago, I think, maybe just more. And for us, you know, one of the principles that we always started with was if we're going to ever do anything, we need to be building from personal experience. And kind of fell into this world of contracting. I was working at Westpac at the time as a contractor. And myself and my co-founders found ourselves kind of burdened by a whole bunch of financial admin. Everything from invoicing to payments and expenses and tax. And it kind of felt a bit weird to us. We'd always been permanent members of staff. And just by taking on contracts at places, suddenly we were, well, for one, we were treated like we was we had no intention of hiring staff or having inventory, but there we were, kind of being treated as though we were sort of, you know, plumbers or electricians that were starting a business and employing people. And it was a really weird feeling to go to work every day and to not be treated at work any differently than anyone else. But yet in your outside life, suddenly you are, you know, an independent contractor or a sole trader. And suddenly that gives you a completely different way of being treated by a lot of different organizations. So for those of you who don't know what Hnry has kind of evolved into, we are an end-to-end service provider that takes care of all of the financial admin for self-employed people. So that is invoicing, expenses, tax, payments, financial planning. We've grown into New Zealand's fastest growing tax agency. So we now have more self-employed people on our books than any of the big four, which is awesome. And that's since our launch, which was probably April 2018 or so. So the best way to think of our service is we do all the things that an accountant does, we do all the things that accounting software does, we do all the things that they don't do, and then we do a whole lot more on top, and it's all on a pay-as-you-go basis, so it's making self-employment simple, affordable, and accessible for everyone. There you go, there's my sales pitch, we're done. I'm not going to be pitching anymore. But what we realized back in the day when we first sort of thought about this idea was that there wasn't anything out there in the market that actually was for independent contractors, for freelancers, for sole traders. Everything was geared at small business. And so there wasn't anything that actually solved our problem. So the first thing you do is obviously set about thinking about how might I solve my problem. And many years ago, but sort of 3-4 years ago, I was working as a startup coach. I worked with the guys at Creative HQ on a number of their programs. And I would always say to any of the ventures that I was speaking to there that within reason, obviously, you know, notwithstanding lots of hardware products where this isn't possible, but for a lot of products that are going to be online based, you really only need 5 things to prove whether or not your product is going to actually solve customer pain. Now, number 1 is a website. Number 2 is an email address. You need a phone. You need Google Docs, and you need a human. So before we at the time, before we built any product, we just had these 5 things. And the idea was, how can we use just these 5 things to prove that people would actually pay for this service? So that's where Hnry started. You imagine, okay, 1-page website. I promised I would say the words WordPress. We had a terrible WordPress website built by me. It was awful. You could log into it, but everything was basically just a form. We had email addresses. Man, we had email addresses by the dozen, because to try and seem legit, we gave ourselves like 10 email addresses. We had info@Hnry, admin@Hnry, partners@Hnry, contractors at Hnry. We literally had as many dummy email addresses, and we put them all over the website. So people would occasionally get in touch and say, can I speak to the accounts department? So I would then switch to my different Gmail account and email them from over there. And I wouldn't put my name on it because I didn't want them to think there was only one person working there. We went out and we bought the cheapest SIM card we can find and the cheapest burner phone that we could. We went to 2 Degrees, and it was horrible. It was like this Android phone that we actually had for quite a while. But we did that thing that old people do, where you give it a PIN code and then you sellotape the PIN code to the back of the phone because everyone forgets it. And if anyone's actually tried to answer an Android phone, one of those tiny ones, it is impossible. So for the first maybe 6 months, no one could actually answer this phone. People would call in, and there'd be such a scramble in the office of people throwing this phone to each other to try and actually see if you could answer it, and we never did. But at the time, we got an 0800 number, and we had a telephone, so we kind of thought, well, you know what, people can get in touch, but we much prefer they used one of our 100 email addresses. Google Docs, obviously, the staple of any fledgling business. We use this to the extreme. We use spreadsheets to the extreme. So our one-page website that you could sign up to and you could log into. Behind the scenes, all that did was send an email to me. And then I copied and pasted that information into a spreadsheet. We didn't have any fancy platform, any fancy database, anything like that. It was literally a spreadsheet that I was updating on a continual basis. Because in those early stages, when you're testing a product, you maybe only have a handful of people that sign up. And there's no point building a huge amount of complex product when all you're doing is actually just trying to validate that someone will see this as a solution to their problem. So if I click onto my next one, more emojis. So where we got to was back in the day when we first started, we had a super expensive service. It was 3 times the cost of what it is today. It was a horrendous product. But it's like that, I think it's a Reid Hoffman quote, that if you're not embarrassed by your MVP, you're doing it wrong. And we almost took that far too literally. The sign-up flow, the friction was unbelievable. You had to print, sign, scan, and return 2 separate bits of documentation just to get in. Ridiculous, you imagine that. And people did it. The website was so devoid of features. You could only have 1 contract at a time, like 1 client at a time. And you couldn't even see previews of invoices, because little did you know that it was just sending me an email and I would create an invoice manually and send it out for you. But we got into this situation where we had, and here's my favorite formula, which is incredibly, incredibly expensive service, huge sign-up friction, really terrible product, terrible website. And of course, as everybody knows, what that equals is very happy customers. Genuinely, customers continue to pay 3% for this service for 6-8 months. And not because they love the product, but because their pain was so great that they were willing to have someone take that away from them. And we could have probably started by building the world's most fancy product, the best software with all this great user experience, but that wouldn't have taught us anything about our customers. By starting in literally the leanest way possible, we were able to understand what it was that customers actually valued out of our service. And it's not the fancy unicorns that run across the screen. It's the fact that you're actually genuinely solving a problem for them, and that's what they're paying you for. Oh man, we're getting the heckles in already. Yeah, go for it.
How much user research and market research have you done at that stage?
Oh, intensive amount. So I had the benefit of being one of the coaches in the first Kiwi Bank FinTech Accelerator. So whilst that FinTech Accelerator was going on and I was coaching teams, in my evenings I did this same accelerator at home. So I was doing all the stuff around product market fit and customer discovery, and I was doing lots of research, and I was basically going out and vetting the needs of the product, all while having this crap website and everything else. And then we had the benefit of actually going through the FinTech Accelerator in the following year, where effectively we got to kind of shortcut the market validation piece and get straight into crafting the value proposition and how do we do go-to-market. By the way, if you want to heckle or ask questions, that was a genuine question, feel free to just chuck your hand up. I'm more than happy to take questions throughout. So what we started with was horrible, but it genuinely solved a customer problem. And so for us, the key thing became about establishing trust. So as a brand new startup with 15 email addresses, you are desperate to establish trust with your target market. You've already established that what you've got solves their problem. You've got some people paying for it, and by that I mean some people that you don't actually know. Obviously, your first couple of customers tend to be people you know, but You know, you do a little bit of social media advertising and you get people you've never met signing up, scanning all the forms in, going through that pain, then you know you've actually got something there. So for us, trust was absolutely everything. Excuse me. So for ages, we were describing ourselves as a tech company back in the day, and we even did tech company things. So we bought a .io domain name. Obviously, that was part of the course. You've got to get a .io. For months, people thought our name was Hnry because they thought that we'd cleverly used the .io domain name to tack onto the end of our brand. Turns out people in the real world who are not tech people don't understand what a .io domain name is. And when you deal with tax and finance, people instantly freak out when they see a .io domain name. We probably all know that it's cool and funky, but to your average Kiwi, that just smells of scam. So having obviously moved on and got a .co.nz and moved on from trying to think of ourselves as a tech company, what we realized is that essentially our product was allowing people to kind of put their invoices, put their funding through us, put their income through us in order to get all the right taxes paid. But the challenge that we had was we needed to be legitimate. We needed to actually be a professional service, because when it comes to tax and filing taxes and paying taxes, you can put out the best software in the world, but everyone wants a professional service that comes underneath it. You know, you look at great products like Xero. Using Xero on your own, you get into the problem that I always talk about, which is basically shit in, shit out. Excuse my language. Which is, if you're left to your own devices, yeah, you can claim that business jet ski. You can go and put in whatever you want. You can classify all your transactions. But without an actual trained professional to vet what is going on, you may as well just be making stuff up. And IRD know that. So from our perspective, we got to the stage of saying, well, you know, if you're not a professional, you're just an amateur. And so software alone wasn't going to solve this problem. So for us, we found that people wanted an all-in-one service. They didn't want to have to pay separately. They didn't want to say, well, maybe I'll put all my information into Hnry and then I'll go somewhere else to pay a professional to check that information and to file it. So for us, it was about becoming a registered tax agent, like an accountant, actually getting those professional qualifications out there that showed people that they didn't need to pay twice. And that was one of the big challenges that we saw at the time with a lot of the sort of accounting software and online cash books, is when you're an independent contractor, you were always having to pay twice. You paid for the software, and then you pay for the person to help you vet what you've put into the software. So for us, it was about combining those things together and saying, well, people don't want to pay twice. People want to pay once. They want something that's simple and easy. And for the love of God, they don't want to think about tax. The irony is not lost on me that we started this business so that I wouldn't have to worry about financial admin, and now I worry about everyone else's financial admin. It's a great place to be. So not only did we shift the way we talked about the business in terms of... Oh.
Was anyone in the business actually knowledgeable in any way?
I'll repeat the question. Was anyone in the business knowledgeable? In a lot of things, yes. But no, Richard, our CFO, is a former audit director at Deloitte and chartered accountant. So credentials. Very important. I remember... I don't think I've told this story publicly, but I remember way back in the day when we didn't have Richard on board. I knew Richard from my time working as a consultant at Deloitte. I remember phoning him up and saying, hey, we need legitimacy. And I said, do you know anyone who wants to be a CFO? And he said, well, what are you doing? And I explained it to him. And the first thing he said was, why wouldn't you ask me to come and do this role? And I went, because I don't know what you do. Because, you know, when you're friends with someone, you never ask what they do. I had no idea that he was like a tax accountant and had years of training. I just knew he worked with the numbers people at Deloitte. And I didn't really know what that was. But yeah, Richard came on really early on, and obviously with his expertise, that was really part of building that platform. Because, again, having an idea and being me, a tech person, you know, it's great for a tech person to try and build this, but you need to know the legislation, you need to know the regulations, and that's where Richard came in really early doors, was to help us build that product that conformed to all those regulatory requirements, but was still, you know, usable for people and, you know, translatable to your average Kiwi who doesn't understand things like provisional tax and terminal tax and all of those great fun words. So shifting how we talked about our product away from being a tech company and more towards being a service company. You know, we kind of joke sometimes that we're like service as a software, in that the service comes first. People want to know that there's a team behind this. They want to know that there's a qualified team who've been doing this for years, who specialize in this kind of work, and that you're not some sort of fly-by-night software that, you know, could cave at any moment, and basically they've got no choice but to file all their taxes themselves. So for us, evolving product development really started way back when with essentially me on my own. And being a tech person, you're kind of comfortable with building some parts of this yourself. I would probably say, and most of the team would admit, I probably know just enough to be dangerous, but not enough to be good. But for me, when you start off, and myself and my co-founders, I was the technical person. Richard was all about the finances and numbers, and Claire is basically operational HR process guru. So for me, it was basically, I was the one that was going to build the tech. I use inverted commas because I don't think the team now would consider what I built to be tech, but there you go, it worked. But at the time, you know, that was basically my role. And product development involved waiting for customers to find bugs and then fixing them as quickly as you could. So you don't have testing environments and staging environments. You know, we were just tweaking production at the time. You know, someone would talk about something and we go, oh, that's a good idea. And then I would literally go and build it and, you know, WordPress add-ons and all that great fun. Man, you're going to be hard work today, aren't you? Yes.
Did you have any designers?
No. I spend a lot of time as a contractor as a UX designer, so I kind of fulfilled a bit of that role, but I wouldn't call myself an out-and-out designer anymore. You wait. You've got a quota of questions. You're using them up pretty fast. No, I'm joking. Feel free. So, you know, the platform, the kind of the crappy one-page website, and the whole thing that hung together with bits of string like it did sort of 3-4 years ago, it ended up being a bit of a rod for our own backs, but also a very useful learning experience. We hadn't had to invest significantly in tech because we could actually learn from our customers. And I lost count of the amount of times that I fiddled with something in the platform and broke it and had to stay up till 4 in the morning trying to get it back again desperately before people got up in the morning and tried to log in. That was the kind of the way that we worked in the early days, when I would come up with some harebrained idea of something I would do, and then it would be on me to then go and pull that out and fix it. It kind of reminded me of, if anyone's done this, with my parents when they first got their computer and I took it apart and I was like, this will be great, I'll improve all of these things. And soon enough, we didn't have a computer. And just like with my parents, they ended up calling in someone who actually knew what they were doing. And that's when we got our first developer in. So for context, we probably ran, probably for a good 18 months of just me building out tech incrementally, validating the product, working with government agencies, working with our customers to qualify what was important to them, before we actually got a full-time developer on board.
How many customers at that point?
The question was how many customers. I think in the early days we kept it to a beta trial of about 30. But if you imagine with all the complexities of the regulations, there's no point taking on like hundreds of people in your first sort of 6-8 months, because you've actually got to prove that you can do the job, that you can get the calculations spot on, that you can make all the payments, do all the filings. So that was what we did in the initial kind of year or so. It was basically build this out, and it was hard work. We were all working in and around our own permanent jobs or contract jobs. This was the sideline for us, the kind of evening and weekends thing, or the 4 in the morning thing for me. But even when we had a developer come on, that still doesn't solve the problem, because you guys will know there's never enough capacity to do all of the things you want to do. But at least with a developer, we actually got some continuous integration, continuous deployment. We actually had a test environment, which was fancy. That was good. So it meant that if we broke things, we didn't deploy them straight into production. It sounds silly, but when you're hacking about in your evenings and weekends, why would you spin up a test environment on day one? You don't even know what you're doing. So we finally got one, which was great. But part of the challenge then becomes you have a developer, so suddenly you have to prioritize, and you have to start thinking about, well, it's not about just the things that I think could be cool. It's actually, you've got customers asking you for things. You need to prioritize somebody's time. And in that case, we didn't get too far before customers started telling us what they wanted. I remember I think it was one morning, some guy emailed and said, hey, look, I've just tried signing up, but your date picker doesn't go back further than 1955. And I turned to Seb, our developer, and I was like, Seb, what gives? And I won't do his French accent, but he said, I didn't think old people would sign up. So, and that customer, Kevin, I bump into him quite a lot because he's at a lot of the events we go to, and he's lovely. He was, poor guy was made redundant out of his permanent job, moved into a contract role, didn't know what he was doing, found Hnry, loves Hnry, but he always gives me shit about the fact that we didn't have a date picker that could actually have his age on it. But we got by, you know, and we struggled through in that early stage. Particularly, you know, one of the most exciting times is when we did manage to answer that phone, and customers would phone up and they'd have a bug that needed fixing, and we really prided ourselves on how quickly we could resolve that. I remember one conversation with a customer. I can't remember what they were asking for. Maybe it was they even noted a spelling mistake or something, or they couldn't use a drop down. And I remember putting them on hold and talking to Seb and saying, let's fix that right now. And I then kept the customer on the phone. I was rambling on like I am now, until the release had gone through, and then I asked them to refresh their screen. Oh, look, it works. Oh, fantastic. Must have been a temporary issue. There you go. I know Michael, our CTO, is in the room, and I think he's probably like crying at the moment about the lack of proper coding standards. But back in the day, that was great fun. Someone comes up with a problem, it's like a couple of years ago, someone comes up with a problem, and effectively you solve it for them right there. You don't have that kind of overhead that sits around it, because you're just a couple of people in a co-working space trying to desperately give customers the thing that they're after. Eventually, we got Michael, represented here by the dude with the spanner. He doesn't have as an impressive attach as that, Michael, just saying. But with Michael coming on board, who we kind of got from Flick, and he brought with him a lot of experience and a lot of quality enterprise experience, I would call it. We got things like zero downtime deployments. We got automated testing. You know, even today, we probably do about 3 to 4 production releases every day. And you know, what we got with Michael was someone who actually brought a great deal of kind of standards and principles and networks for other staff. But suddenly you start to be in a world where you have proper stability, and you need to start thinking more strategically about how you're building the product. What does the roadmap look like? How do you actually prioritize the things that are going to be most important, not just for your customers, but obviously for you long term? Because back in the early stages, it's all about getting something out to the customer as quickly as possible, because you're desperate for them to sign up or keep using or whatever it is. But then suddenly you start to think, well, what about the strategic long-term vision for this platform? And that's when you start to talk about what sits under the hood and how can we get rid of James's code and all of that good stuff. But you know, bringing in more resource, and we kind of, I suppose in the early days, were relatively tech heavy. That allowed us to really think about where we wanted to put those foundations in place and how we actually you know, got off all of the terrible infrastructure that I'd set up. This is like a confession for me. I don't really talk about this too often, but this is like me saying how terrible I was back in the day. But actually getting to a stage where you could sensibly allow your customers to dictate your roadmap, not within the space of 15 minutes, but actually be able to have a really sensible idea of what you were building and when, and having customers feed into that. That all came with kind of increased size and increased structure. We didn't start out with a product roadmap. We started out just trying to validate the proposition. So obviously from that, three people, we are now, fast forward, I don't know, 18 months, and we are now a 15 full-time staff business. Photos, emoji is not representative of anybody. But the way you start to having to evolve is you go very quickly from 3 people to 10 people to 15 people, and we all always wanted to work as a cross-functional team. We kind of saw an opportunity a while ago where we could have split things out, but one thing we love about this business is that everyone talks to customers. Literally everyone, from the engineering people to Richard, our CFO, to me, to everyone, because everyone has to represent this business, and they have to know how it works, and they have to understand what customers struggle with, where the customer pain is. And so what we've had to kind of almost design is a way of working that allows us to be incredibly efficient, but still work as a single cross-functional team. And I won't go into all the boring details, but effectively, we've kind of evolved a model that is agile, but I'm always kind of a bit reticent to go down that militant agile route. So we don't do burn downs, we don't do story points. Effectively, as we've grown this team, we've maintained as kind of an approach of always being as efficient as we possibly could be for our size. So that meant not jumping straight into Jira at the first 3 people you get on board, but actually starting to evolve your model almost weekly to say, well, where are we at now? And starting to look forward and say, where will we be in a year's time, in 8 months' time? And I remember when we had, I think we got our 8th member of staff, and we said, right, now we need to start planning for what do we want this organization to look like when we're 30 staff? And then we start adopting those practices on that day. And that means that when you get to 30 staff, you don't have someone walking in going, what do you mean you don't have any documentation? Because back in the day, we didn't write anything down, why would you? So actually starting to put those principles in place became really important. And I do always joke that, you know, when we started at the dining room table with a couple of spreadsheets, you don't start thinking about company culture. You start thinking about, I'm going to build some cool product and I'm going to get people to pay for it. But by the time you start getting a few people in who aren't just your friends, suddenly you have staff and you have responsibilities and you're trying to build a culture around what you're doing as a business and what you're providing to customers. And suddenly that becomes all consuming. And the product stuff is great, but actually the thing that gets your product out there is a good team and a good team that works together. Because anyone can have great ideas, but it's all about execution and getting the right people on board. So we went through various phases, and we still do go through various phases of ways of working, from having a single Trello board to then having 4 Trello boards. And then we got our first office where we had the classic Kanban on a meeting room wall. And then we decided that wasn't working, so we moved it to being a vertical Kanban, or the Van-Ban, as we called it. And then we realized how expensive Post-its are. Like, unbelievably expensive. We'd worked so hard to raise money, and most of it was going on Post-its. Because with a team of like 10 people, and every task is like 2 hours, and each task is a Post-it, man, the waste bins would just fill and fill with Post-its. And it got to the point we said, okay, now's the time we need to take this online. We actually need to move this to something that's going to be a better way of tracking that backlog. But again, not jumping to enterprise solutions, but saying what's the right thing for us to choose right now that doesn't hook us into something for the long term, but allows us to road test, to experiment, to say what is the right way of working.
When you said the, can you talk about when you made those decisions that the Kanban board wasn't working or Trello wasn't working? Can you talk more about what wasn't working about them?
Well, they didn't fit for a start, so not having it actually fit onto the board was probably a problem. But we worked so cross-functionally that the challenge we had was all of the ways of structuring those boards got incredibly complex in terms of multiple owners. You imagine the handoffs between the technical side of the business and the operational side of the business, and being able to have the right handover of tasks in place, but right-sized for a business of sort of 5, 6, 7 people. It became really difficult to track across that board, and being able to celebrate wins and being able to actually acknowledge where there was a lot of work going on when everyone is working on slightly different sizes of task. And what we ended up with was, you know, we couldn't open the windows because as soon as you open the window, all the Post-its blow down. And we found that, you know, as we started growing as a business, there was just too much stuff going on. The pace we were running at meant that the board either couldn't keep up or just became horrendously complicated. And that's the point where actually, you know, software does, you know, serve a purpose. And whilst we lost the visual appeal of a board, what we gained was huge amounts of efficiency. And, you know, that to this day, it's actually been much easier. We kind of obviously transitioned into a physical way of working and then transitioned back out. At the time, it was great, but once you evolve beyond that, trying to force yourself into using Kanban and trying to force yourself into that physical thing, it just became really inefficient. And it was much easier for us to go, okay, what's the next evolution? And these steps don't happen. It's not like 6 months or something. We're talking about, we get together as a team regularly, have beers on a Friday, and we say, well, what are we going to do differently next week? What do we want to try? What's the next experiment that's going to make us more efficient for the following week? And then we try it. And we experiment with different ways of working. I mean, I remember one of those sessions, Ben, our marketing guy, suggested he does a lot of content writing. And he said, well, what I'm really struggling with is when someone drops a half-an-hour meeting in my calendar right in the middle of my afternoon. And he said, usually I'm head down writing some content, and then I've got to suddenly switch my context into something else. And so he said, look, next week, would everyone mind if we just shifted all of our internal meetings before 12 p.m.? And we were amazed that the difference in productivity was huge, because suddenly everyone had the entire afternoon to themselves to work. All the internal meetings are all in the mornings, and there's only a set amount of time that you can have for meetings, because then you have to prioritize. You know, if I'm going to go to, you know, after stand-up, I need to sit down and talk through a kickoff of a particular epic or whatever that might be, I don't have time to do anything else. So unless it's more important than those things, it just shifts out. And that was a really good way of actually making sure people had enough time in their diaries to work, particularly when you get to 15 people. It's very easy to fill up your diary with all these pointless meetings. So starting to put structure around, starting to experiment with different ways of having meetings, different ways of actually reducing the time spent yapping and actually getting on to more activity has been great for the business, like really amazing productivity shifts. So I want to talk a little bit about operating at the limit of capacity, which I suppose I've come to I wanted a rev limiter emoji, but I typed in Speedo, which is why we've got that one, but I figure that's like flying by the seat of your pants. I thought that was a good one. Operating under pressure, or a clock, I don't know. You kind of get what I'm talking about. So when you first start off, you probably don't have tech, you don't have customers, you're out proving what your proposition is and that it's got value. And that was the point that I kind of developed a bit of a love of human glue. And we talk about kind of wanting to automate stuff, but back in the early days, human glue was everything. Manual processes, actually just stepping through the process yourself to understand what needed to be done. And not going out to your customers and saying, hey, by the way, did you know that when you submit an invoice, I do that manually? But it's more, like all those sayings about the duck swimming along the top of the water and then underneath the feet are paddling. That's what it feels like in like the first 18 months, because you can't build all the automation, you can't build all the tech. You need to actually have customers and know what they want and not make assumptions about the things that they're looking for. So we wore a whole bunch of manual pain. And in the early stages, and it's a really common thing. I did hear a story from BNZ, I think, that on their internet banking, if you changed your address, that just sent an email to a call center somewhere, and then they updated your address on some back-end system. I don't know whether that's wholly true, but it made me feel a lot better when it was, 2 years ago, and I was making 80 transactions a day manually in internet banking on behalf of our customers. And it's great for the first couple of days because it's a bit of a game, and then you find yourself kind of losing your mind when you're processing that many transactions absolutely manually. But that's what you do because you don't have anything. There's no point in automating ahead of time. You have to know what's going to give. And so for us, part of the way we kind of ran our business and part of the way we kind of started out was to kind of operate at the rev limiter and to look forward and say, we've got a huge amount of human glue and manual process. What's the thing that's going to crack first? Given our customer trajectory, given the growth of the business, what is going to go first? And is it the manual transaction processing that I was doing? Is it some other part of the business which might be kind of something else? And identifying those areas that are going to genuinely cause the business issue. And then ahead of time saying, okay, now we're going to build the automation. Rather than doing everything up front, build some gold-plated thing with all the fancy automation. We didn't want to make assumptions about what was actually going to be a real cost to the business. So you wear some cost to serve, and that's fine when you're growing. And back to the early days of spreadsheets, that ran the business. People paid 3 times as much as we charge them today for a service where actually it was like a hamster on a wheel in the background doing all of those manual jobs.
Speaking of pricing.
Man, okay, number 4. Does anyone else want to ask a question? Sorry, you go ahead.
How much did your pricing change and how much were you experimenting with pricing through those various?
Well, we have an interesting pricing model in that we charge on a percentage of income. So when you sign up to Hnry, you get given your own unique bank account to have your self-employed income paid into. And so we priced ourselves a bit like tax is priced, which is, as much as people would like to say that tax isn't fair, if you just ignore the fact of what the rates are, it's actually a relatively equitable model where people who earn less pay less and people who earn more most of the time pay more. But given the way our product worked, we hated subscriptions. I would always call a gym subscription a charitable donation because it's basically I sign up and I never go. But that whole thing of signing up for a service and being continually charged again and again for a service you're not using really frustrated us. So we love the idea of not just a percentage of income model that was actually kind of fair and equitable, but also a pay-as-you-go model that meant that if you're not earning, as a lot of contractors might take holiday or might finish their contract, you're not paying if you're not earning. So we experimented a lot in the early days around that and obviously landed on, well, we had the classic startup pricing. We had our 3 price models with a 1.5% plan and a 3% plan, and then I think it was a 6% plan that was trying to anchor people into the most popular plan, which was the 3% plan. And my biggest fear came to light because we'd segmented the product into different features and said, oh, for 1.5% you can get this bit, and then for 3% you get this bit. And 6%, I can't remember what it was, but it was something that I remember Richard saying to me at the time, you can't offer that to customers. And I went, don't worry, this is startups. No one takes the most expensive plan. They always go for the most popular one. And I remember seeing that sign up come in where someone selected the most expensive plan. I think I was on holiday at the time, and I was like, shit. I didn't want to tell Richard, so I phoned the customer, and I said, oh, based on what you're after, it looks like you're probably best off on our 3% plan. The 6% is probably a bit too expensive. And so I talked him into the 3% plan, and then updated the website live onto production at the time to just strip out the other prices. And I'm like, sorry, Richard, I won't do that again. And that's where, I mean, we did realize that three pricing points is just useless. Our entire business ethos is about making it simple for people, and we made our pricing complex. So over time, we reduced our prices down. Our price is now 1% and is capped. Like previously, we charged 3% of income with no cap. It felt grubby. Like it was horrible. The system was rubbish. It was me running around. It didn't feel like we were actually being the fair, ethical company that we wanted to be. So as soon as we started seeing people being charged that much, we just dropped our prices. We said it's just not right. People might pay 3% for this service, but we don't think the service is worth 3%. And so 1% has actually been, for the last couple of years, has been a really strong price point for us, because it actually comes in, if you combine the cost of an accountant and accounting software and your own time, that is way more than 1% of your income. And the amount of time we save people and the kind of peace of mind we give people that actually everything's being done correctly, 1% is, we still come back to that thing. It's fair and it's accessible for anyone. And that's anyone from the people charging the Lime scooters or whatever and doing Uber driving, all the way through to kind of program managers, product owners. It's just fair pricing. It's not gouging people. And so, yeah, we did a whole lot of work, and we made a whole bunch of mistakes with pricing. But for us, it was about finding the right level of price that is showing that it has value, but also not kind of ripping people off, which is kind of where we're at. We're all about fairness and making things equal for people. So the way that we kind of, with our kind of manual processes, operating that rev limiter kind of allows us to be a bit dictated by the data, to kind of look at, well, where is the greatest cost to serve, and where are we starting to eat into margins because things are getting more manual, or there's more customer growth, and that's impacting us overall. And so, yes, segue into data. So I'm an absolute data nerd. Like, I think anyone who is here from Hnry will know that I'm just such a, honestly, like, being data-driven just seems like a sensible thing. And when you start, you don't really have a lot of data. But for us, oh, look, I got an emoji. What? I made that one. I had to do something. It was a slow day. But for me, the data drives everything, from knowing what your customers are doing, from understanding what's working on social media, what isn't. And so right from the start of Hnry, it was all about how do we use what we have in our platform to know what people are looking for, whether that's bounce rates on the website, whether that's looking at how many people are raising invoices, to kind of look at, well, what are our customers actually doing and what do they want? And what that evolved into was a process where actually we don't do anything without data, without fact. And we look at, when either we're kind of asking people what they want, or actually looking and saying, well, where are people struggling in certain processes on our platform, and how can we make things easier? And then we don't just go and do it and slap ourselves on the back. We say, actually, well, we're going to deploy this thing, and then we're going to watch in real time as the data changes, as the customer behavior changes. And there's actually something really satisfying about watching a kind of screen capture of someone using your platform, seeing them run into some sort of issue, making a tiny change, and it could even be a copy change, making a tiny change and then observing the real-time impact of that. Once you've actually deployed that change out, and saying, well, actually, does that alter the behavior? Does that actually benefit that customer? And whether your customer knows it or not and notices, being able to deliver valuable experiences in tiny little increments based on just looking at that data. And I did say to Michael that I would put a photo up. This is one of our sheets of our Google Data Studio dashboard that is on the big 65-inch telly in the office. Thanks, investors. But for us, this is basically, for me personally, this is the lifeblood of our business. And knowing what is working and what is not working is something that is everyone in the business's responsibility. So these dashboards and everything else that started off all based on spreadsheets, because that's what I love, have evolved into being plugged into our platform, being plugged into our social media, being plugged into everything. So actually you can look at the entire business's health on this dashboard as you walk past to get a cup of coffee, which clearly everyone does that. Rhiann? Yes. Hey.
What is the health of the business based on this, Richard?
Oh, I didn't put any health of the business ones up here. These are all ones about profile completion because I didn't want to put anything sensitive. But yeah, so this is all about, for reference, we have various ways that people can sign up, and this is about how far people go through the sign up, which pages they hit, what the time taken to profile completion is. So for instance, the average days to first pay, so obviously with our platform, you sign up, you get given your bank account, you get paid into it. This stretches back until, I think August or so. So you can see for a long time, it was really variable. There's a long time that people took to get paid. That looks like 15 days or something from signing up to getting paid. And then we did a whole bunch of work on the sign-up flow, the onboarding, just tiny incremental changes. And you can see we've kind of brought that down. And that's what tells us that as we were making those changes, that we were on the right trajectory. And similar things with like profile completion and various other things, trying to identify where there are various spikes and where there are various things that don't stack up, and essentially looking to make tiny incremental changes over time. In the way that we develop, it's all based around week sprints. So we might develop something and then spend some time monitoring whether or not that actually made a difference. But as I say, the way that we're using the data, it very much started off with the ultimate minimum viable product of, what's the basic revenues of the business. But suddenly being able to plug that directly into our systems, into everything else, makes it a really powerful tool. And we do all of our board reporting on Data Studio, but that's mainly because I'm lazy and I don't want to have to prepare anything. I just much rather put in a time range or a date range onto the Data Studio report and then send that out as a PDF. Or just give it to the investors, don't really care. The fact is that being transparent is absolutely part of what we're doing, and we really enjoy the inputs we get from our investors in terms of thinking of new ways to kind of put the product out there and to think about new things that we could be doing. So for us, kind of sharing that data is just part and parcel of who we are as a business. Very much kind of using data to drive the decisions we make, using customer data, using customer interaction to determine what to do next, and kind of letting our customers build the product. Because anything that we do ourselves is just an assumption. Until we can have all the assumptions in the world about how people are using it or what people want, but engaging with customers literally every day of the week about what they want to see, what do they want to see next, having them vote on what are the features that they want to have that will really make a difference to them, and then being able to build that. There's something, as I say, something really satisfying to I think, from an engineering perspective and from a customer support perspective, to be able to actually make a real difference to people that such that they come back and go, you actually did it. When someone puts those suggestions in on the web chat and said, oh, wouldn't it be great if? We love those. We'll collate those. We then tag them. When we get a few of them come in, we'll prioritize a piece of work to do it. And then we go back out to those customers and go, hey, great idea. And then we tag those customers on social media and say, these guys made that happen. We only did it because they asked. And for us, that's as much about acknowledging that the customers are far more of the platform than we are. They know far more about what they want. And so we're just here to serve. We're just there to provide them whatever functionality they need to make sure that they can be have as little burden as possible when it comes to their financial admin. And that's not for us to determine what comes next. That's for them. Man, you're clocking up these questions.
So with the metrics, so when you're contemplating a new piece of functionality, do you have target metrics that you're aiming for, and then are you measuring everything, or are you measuring very specific things?
I was just about to talk about this. This is good. Another good segue. So I was going to talk about how we use metrics to drive what we build. Everything we do is almost on a quarterly cycle. So at the start of the quarter, we've got a set of probably like 5 or 6 top-line metrics that we will start to prioritize, and whether that might be growing revenue, reducing cost to serve, various other things that are, things like average revenue per customer. Those kind of metrics are really important to our business. So what we do is prioritize those, and we say, these are the things that are going to be most important this quarter. And then we look at the backlog of work that we've got. And we start to say, well, where does this backlog of work align against these metrics? And to what extent can we start to deliver measurable contribution towards some of those outcomes? So it's not about delivering stuff. It's about saying, actually, what are the increments we can make that will start to shift the needle on a bunch of these different metrics? And then obviously the great thing about it is as we start building, as we start deploying, you can see the actual impact on these metrics straight away. And it may be that allows you to then take a slightly different trajectory within that quarter. But for the most part, that's a really useful way of having people have some kind of milestone that they can look back on and say, hey, we targeted a X% increase in margins by reducing cost to serve. And we can actually see the direct impact of what we do on those metrics. So it all kind of starts with that kind of metric-led development. And I think probably there's a lot of people in the business who, where they came from, they could basically throw requirements into a hopper and just expect them to come out, whereas actually we're a bit more critical and we come back and we just say, well, look, we need to see actual data, fact that tells us that either this will improve something or it will drive a better customer experience. And that could be anecdotal customer evidence, but nothing gets done without an evidence base being in place. Awesome. Hey, look, that's kind of all of my ramble. I was going to take questions. I feel like we've had them all. But yeah, I'd love to throw it out to questions from maybe further back. I don't know if you want to run up with a microphone. Or...
won't make your voice louder, but the people on the screen will hear you, so you won't have to repeat the question.
Just shout.
You took.
Yeah, I don't think the microphone's on. I think you just have to shout.
It won't make you loud.
Could have taken this one.
Sorry about the microphone. You told us a lot about the business. I'm a developer, so I'm wondering what you did to scale the technical aspects of the system.
So the question was, what did we do to scale the technical aspects of the system? Well, this is probably a good time to say that we're hiring. And if anyone would like someone work at Hnry, come and give me a shout afterwards. So on the technical side of the business, it's really interesting because a lot of the work that we've done has been around enabling us to scale. So less about kind of let's go and hire a whole bunch of people and sit them in a room, but more what are the really smart ways that we can enable scale within this business. So when we built all of our banking integration, for instance, the way it was built from day one was actually it's scalable, so now we can provision thousands and thousands of bank accounts anytime we want to. So I'd just say that the way that we scaled the technical side of the business was looking at the kind of projected growth trajectory of the business and saying, well, what needs to be in place for when a certain milestone is reached? And again, back to that human glue thing, that the tech side of the business is about relieving manual pressure as opposed to the tech being the driver. Because our customers don't care about the tech. They didn't like a .io domain name. They don't care that the tech is there. What they want is trusted professionals who are going to make sure that all of their taxes get done correctly. That's it. That's what they're buying. The tech just makes our lives easier, and it makes it easier for us, and so I don't have to process 80 transactions a day. But when you take that approach and you say, well, it's not about scaling the tech, it's about scaling the business as a whole, and the tech is just the enabler that makes sure that I don't have to spend my evenings doing manual work. Does that answer your question? I feel like I haven't answered your question.
I can take for you.
I mean, it's incredibly scalable stuff. I think Michael, who's our CTO, is in the room and is in a better position to talk about scalability of the tech platform. So, Michael, put your hand up. There we go. Michael will answer all of your questions. Anyone else? Any more tough questions from the front? Do you want to send the microphone back, Tokes?
Hello. All right. Cool. Anyways, so my question kind of goes back to prioritization. So, for example, like when customers, they request something, it's really just about optimizing your existing system. But like on the other hand, you also mentioned there are more strategic level kind of changes that needs to happen. So, like, how do you prioritize between like fixing things that they're asking for now versus, like investing or like putting resource onto doing like the more strategic changes? Yeah.
Okay, so the question was about kind of strategic priorities versus customer-driven change and how we prioritize between that. Just almost kind of naturally, and it sounds like it happened by accident, but there was a bit of theory around it. We've ended up in almost these quarterly cycles where kind of one quarter will be dedicated to customer-driven change, and we deliver a lot of features out to customers. And then we spend a quarter almost investing more in strategic change or internal kind of automation, operations stuff. So we almost go through this cycle where it's about how do we deliver new features into the hand of the customers for 3 months, and then we spend some time kind of operationally in reducing cost to serve or increasing efficiency. And obviously every quarter we're delivering stuff for the customer, but it's more about where we put the majority of our effort. And whether it's 70-30 or 80-20, for us it's more about always having the strategic priorities in mind, but knowing that we can have all these great strategic ideas of the things that we want to do, but at the end of the day, we've got a customer base that's helping drive us forward. So it has kind of naturally evolved into a kind of 1 quarter off, 1 quarter on, And the great thing about that is it prevents you from getting into that really crazy thing where you end up changing the platform so often that old customers get confused and new customers don't have the context of how it works. So it allows us to kind of almost release change from a customer-driven perspective, let that bed in before we start doing anything else. Because I think with the speed that we work, we could just rip through all of these customer-led changes and the system would be changing every few days, which would just be a horrible user experience for everyone.
Cool. Hey.
Hey.
So right at the beginning, you talked about how you'd grown to sort of 15 people and you looked at splitting the team and then decided against it because you wanted to stay as a cross-functional team. How do you see that working at sort of 30, 60, 90 people?
A bigger office. No, it's a really good question. I think, naturally, when we sat down a little while ago, when we got to about 6 people, and we looked at what the future of the business looked like, and it's absolutely going in that direction of the kind of 30, 40 people, we ended up getting to a point where we actually started defining product areas for the business and started putting some structure around, what are the core kind of 8 or 9 kind of almost functional areas of the product that are able to be sort of somewhat separated. So we put in place those plans to say, well, given that everything we do is tagged against a kind of priority metric or it's tagged against one of these product areas, when the time comes, we'll be able to segregate that out and still maintain cross-functional teams. So very, very important to us that the people who are on the front line are in the same stand-ups as the people who are developing the functionality, but that we're actually, and I suppose we already do it today, we kind of create little mini project teams that are working together over the course of a particular quarter. So for instance, if we're doing something around, I don't know, banking integration, then we will assemble the people from across the business to essentially be running point on banking integration. And whilst they don't segregate off into a separate stand-up and go and have meetings off by themselves, because it's all very much about transparency of what we're doing, those are the people who are specifically tasked with delivering that thing. So it allows us to have the flexibility of a large cross-functional team where everyone gets visibility of progress, as well as the opportunity for, as we scale, starting to segment a little bit more by those product areas that we've already established, which is a bit like I was saying earlier, you sit down and you say, what do you want to be when you're 30 people? Let's start operating that way now. And that's very much the principle we had in place was, let's just assume that we've got 30 people here and we need a sensible way of organizing this. And so we've had that for probably about sort of 6-8 months now, but we're yet to get to the point where we're big enough that we actually need to split it, but not far off.
Hey James, Ben from Silverstripe.
Hey.
A question about how has investment helped you become more scalable? And I'm going to do all my questions in one go. And is Hnry profitable? And in which part of the journey did that come?
Cool. Okay, so questions there. So how did investment help? Are we profitable? At what stage did that come at? So has investment helped? Absolutely yes. I think when we kind of raised money a couple of times over the last couple of years, most recently from a VC in Australia. But all of those rounds, all of that funding that we brought on has helped us with immense amounts, not just of being able to scale from a financial perspective, but also the kind of networks and links that come from being part of that kind of portfolio of investors. So the investment has helped. Obviously, we didn't take on any investment until we were sure that we had enough of a product and enough of product market fit that we could actually get what we wanted out of investment. There's a lot of people kind of taking on investment too early and sort of not having enough kind of runs on the board to be able to command kind of decent amounts of investment, and that can be difficult. We were very lucky in that we managed to find some investors that understood what we were doing. They were people who worked in tax. They were people who worked in they worked in kind of tech, and they kind of understood what we were trying to drive towards. It's an interesting question about profitability. At the moment, we're obviously in a huge growth, so not one of the metrics that we're measuring. If we wanted to, and I always say this, if we wanted to, we could stop expanding right now and be profitable. It'd be very, very easy. But I don't think any of our investors would thank us for basically sitting on a whole pile of money they gave us to go and take Hnry to the world. So for us right now, the priority is not profitability. The priority is, as usual, is things like revenue and customer growth, and actually, using the funding that we've received to really build out this product and deliver it out to as many people as possible. But looking, you can see from revenue growth numbers that profitability is incredibly achievable and is not particularly far away, but at the same time, I think our investors would be encouraging us to continue to spend and continue to grow as fast as possible.
Hi, you've talked about scale. I'm just wondering, how do you scale service as a software?
How do we scale service as a software? Yeah, it's a really good point. So we basically, if you imagine when we started, we had no scale, we had no tech, but the way that we're scaling is actually by removing friction, removing a huge amount of the human element of what we're doing. So we talk about that human glue, and I love the idea of human glue being able to solve a bunch of problems. That's not scalable. But what we've got to is a model where, by looking at, again, I'm going to bore people talking about data, but by looking at the data, we know what it takes in terms of the human component of service required to satisfy a certain volume of customers. And if you imagine that, I'll just use like really, really low numbers because it makes it simpler for me to work it out. If you know that for every 100 customers you get, it takes 0.1 of a person to support them, you know the point at which you're going to need to get more people, and you're going to need to scale that up. But if you also know that that 0.1 of a person could be reduced significantly by automating various things, you can then invest in reducing that down to 0.01, 0.001. And so for us, the way that we scale is twofold, which is number one, always remembering that we're a service business. This is not a business that's going to be devoid of humans, that is just going to be, giving people robo-advice on tax. Because until that gets really, really good, people will smell it a mile off. We know that our customers like to be able to phone someone up, and they like to be able to be on the live chat and ask a question and get a response from a human. And so part of that and part of going out for investment was making our investors very, very aware that this is not a pure SaaS business that you can go out and deploy into a new market and scale. This is actually a service business that is just backed by very, very scalable technology that can significantly kind of deliver real value to customers with very minimal human touch. But actually delivering that means having people on the ground. So for us, it's about making our people as efficient as possible, reducing any manual effort that's unnecessary, and keeping it just to that core of support that we require to scale.
Hi, James.
Hey.
How has your approach to customer testing evolved as you've grown?
Oh, it's great. Great question, Shane. Thank you. It's almost like I could have prepped you on that, but I didn't. So customer testing for us has been really interesting. We didn't do any until Michael came on board and brought in the whole idea of feature flagging new ideas. And that's really been a massive shift in our business. This is sort of 18 months, 2 years ago. And so imagine, we had a great example when we built our credit card integration so that Hnry customers can get paid by credit card at no extra cost to them. It was one of those things that we knew customers wanted. We had a group of customers who we knew were kind of high invoice volume people. These are guys who are sending out maybe 10, 15 invoices a day. And having their customers pay via credit card would be a huge benefit. So we already had a pool of people we knew would value this. We had very engaged customers. So essentially what we did is we went to them and said, would you like to be part of an early beta test? And we had all of them come back, they were all excited, and we set the expectation that, hey, look, it might not work 100% smoothly because you are the early adopters, you're the ones testing this thing. And by feature flagging it and letting people use it, we then got really good engagement from customers, we got really good feedback so that we could refine what we were doing, and then we got to release it out to the rest of our customer base, and obviously tag the beta testers on social media so that we can recognize that they're just as much of a part of this as we are. And from that moment on, anything that's slightly larger that we do on the platform, we go and feature flag it, we beta test it with a group of users, and our users just love that part of the engagement, that actually they can be there from a discovery point all the way through seeing how it looks, to then getting to use it, to then seeing when it gets rolled out to everyone else. There's something quite simple being a customer and feeling like you're helping to co-design a product.
On those lines, customers, you said everyone in the business is somehow engaged with customers. How is that structured in any specific way, and how does that manifest?
It's relatively structured. We used to all, because we run on intercom and we have live chat and we have emails and whatever, we used to actually just have shifts and everyone would take a shift. And now we have a customer success team that handles things. But obviously, the customer success team is not about just frontline support. It's about them being able to kind of represent what's best for the customer. And so sometimes they need to go and all kind of step away from frontline support, and that's the point where the rest of the team will then pitch in. So on a regular basis, you've got the marketing people answering live chats, you've got everyone in the business kind of regularly engaging with customers, not just online but also in person. So we've moved from a structure of being incredibly fixed about it to actually getting to a point where the right person to answer the question is the one that answers the question and sees that through to completion. So whilst we have some people that are more of sort of a almost second line support, we haven't put that kind of fixed structure around it, because actually part of the thing that we really want to put forward is that we like our customers to know who we are. And we like them to see the faces and know that we're real humans. And we like to show them that we've got more than just one person who does live chat, that actually we have a whole group of people with different skills who bring different flavors of the same thing out into the real world. So what's great about that is that everyone learns how to understand customer pain. And then when we all sit together as a team, it's really easy for people to think about, oh, hey, you know who would benefit from this? I had that customer that I was talking to about the iOS app or whatever it was. And it's really great to have like that hive mind that you can then reach out to that specific customer and say, hey, look, we're going to make some changes for you because this was something that would benefit you.
And how often do you go out in the field and actually observe people?
We in terms of observing people, we usually, when we've done it, we've invited them in. So we had some, which was random. We had some dude turned up and wanted a training course on how to use our app. But yeah, usually a lot of the stuff we do is customer discovery. So we'll go and canvas a whole lot of customers for who'd like to kind of do some initial discovery, and we talk about things like whether it's quoting when we built that. And that's really, we've got to be respectful of our customers' time, because as independent contractors and freelancers, their time is obviously their business, and we know what their costs of their time are. So we try and minimize the amount of their time that we suck up. Tokes.
Yeah, just a real quick one, James. For quite a young company, you've got quite an impressive list of partners on your website that you're working with. Be cool to know a little bit about your strategy on that. How do you figure out which part of your product's best serviced by a partner and when you should go to a partner to build it out?
Cool. So it was a question about how we decide which bits of our product to work with partners on. Well, for us, for a bit of context, we obviously go direct to the consumer with our product, but we also work a lot with some very large organizations who employ the self-employed, with people like recruitment agents. And one thing that we've really found interesting is actually we can be a little bit selective about our partners, and we like to genuinely engage with partners and to basically provide an ecosystem that is a kind of almost a like-minded ecosystem of people who play nicely together. So we don't partner with people that we don't believe in. So for instance, we don't go off chasing Uber for all their taxi drivers, but we will partner with people like Zoomy because they do right by their drivers. And that's that kind of stance that we take. And various others, if you look at some of the KiwiSaver providers like Simplicity, again, that was a no-brainer for us and for them as well. A lot of their members are self-employed, and kind of looking at organizations that share that brand alignment and that ethos alignment. For us, people can see what we do as being, genuinely good and genuinely fair, and actually, for us, it then becomes how do we find those people that our customers will benefit from? And so partnerships and integrations really come down to building that face-to-face relationship of why do we do what we do and why do they do what they do, and then going from there. And it's just been really exciting to see how many organizations are genuinely engaged with the kind of struggles that contractors and freelancers face, and are really excited to be able to finally have something that they can offer those people that really makes a difference to them. Thank you.
All right, big round of applause. Awesome. All right, let's wrap it up. Though you're more than welcome to hang around and chat. Part of the reason we do these is so you can talk to each other as well as listen to interesting speakers. So please hang around and drink and chat. Thanks, guys.
Cheers, Tokes.